Have you ever watched something so weird you have to double-check if it actually happened? Well, history is full of those moments, stuff so absurd it makes you question reality. Like a war where humans fought birds, and the birds won. Or an entire town that danced itself to the brink of death. While it sounds like a Twilight Zone episode, this was real life. History isn't just wars and kings in wigs, it's full of moments so bizarre they make today's headlines look boring. So, if you're ready to have your mind blown by some of the most what-the-heck events in history, stick around. Because trust us, at the end of this video, you'll never look at history the same way again. Number 15. The 1904 Olympic Marathon. The 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis wasn't just a race, it was pure chaos from start to end. The first-place finisher cheated by hitching a ride in a car, the second-place runner nearly died from rat poison, and the fourth-place finisher ran in dress pants, took a nap mid-race, and still placed. The course itself was a nightmare. The roads were so dusty that one runner was hospitalized after the dust shredded his esophagus and stomach lining. As if that wasn't bad enough, the race organizer intentionally withheld water to study dehydration. Fred Lors, the supposed winner, rode most of the course in a car after cramping up. He only ran the last part, casually crossing the finish line before admitting it was just a joke. Thomas Hicks, who actually won, was given a mix of egg whites and strychnine, a poison used to kill rats, as a performance booster. He was so weak by the end that his trainers carried him across the finish line. Andarin Carvajal, a Cuban runner, arrived in dress clothes, gambled away his money, cut his pants into shorts, ate rotten apples mid-race, took a nap, and still finished fourth. Absolute chaos. Number 14. Unsinkable Sam. Some sailors struggle to survive one shipwreck, but this cat makes it through 3. His story started in 1941 aboard the Nazi battleship Bismarck, which the British Navy sank. Hours later, British sailors found him floating on a wooden plank and took him aboard the HMS Cossack, giving him the name Oscar. His luck didn't improve. The Cossack was torpedoed months later, killing 159 crew members. Oscar survived again and was rescued, earning the nickname Unsinkable Sam. You'd think someone would have retired him then, but no. His final posting was the HMS Ark Royal, a British aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, the Ark Royal was also torpedoed by a Nazi U-boat. Once again, Oscar made it out alive, while the ship sank. After surviving 3 naval disasters, the British Navy decided enough was enough and retired him to a seaman's home in Belfast. He lived comfortably until passing away in 1955, leaving behind an absurdly legendary tale. Number 13. Khutulun. Khutulun wasn't just a Mongolian princess. She was a warrior who terrified every man who dared to challenge her. A descendant of Genghis Khan, she was trained in combat and could ride into battle as fiercely as any soldier. But what really set her apart? Her unbeaten wrestling record. She refused to marry unless a suitor could defeat her in a wrestling match. Every man who challenged her had to wager horses, and since none of them ever won, she ended up with thousands, some say as many as 10,000. Even Marco Polo wrote about her, describing her as one of the strongest warriors he had ever seen. Her undefeated streak made people uncomfortable. Her father pressured her to marry, and some historians believe she eventually chose a husband, but only to quiet the critics. Whether she did or not, one thing is clear. Khutulun wasn't just a princess. She was a force of nature who refused to be a wife or girlfriend. Number 12. Soldier Bear. During World War II, a group of Polish soldiers stumbled upon an orphaned bear cub. Instead of leaving him behind, they took him in, named him Wojtek, and raised him like one of their own. He quickly became a beloved member of the unit, play wrestling with soldiers, drinking beer, and even smoking cigarettes. But Wojtek wasn't just a mascot. He was officially enlisted in the Polish army. To get him on a British transport ship, the soldiers registered him as a private, complete with his own rank, paybook, and serial number. He didn't just sit around either. During battles, Wojtek carried heavy crates of ammunition like it was nothing. After the war, Wojtek retired to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he lived out the rest of his days. He became a national hero, with statues in both Poland and Scotland. A bear that drank beer, smoked cigarettes, and served in the military? That's not just history. Well, that's a legend. All right now, let's talk about the special event. Number 11, the Great Emu War of Australia. Australia is no stranger to weird historical events, and this one might just be at the top of the list. In 1932, during the Great Depression, farmers were desperately trying to grow more wheat just to get by. But as if battling a brutal economy wasn't enough, an army of over 20,000 emus decided to invade the farmlands, turning crops into their personal buffet. So how did this bird invasion turn into a full-blown war? The farmers, fed up and overwhelmed, called in the Ministry of Defense for backup. What followed was a bizarre mission where armed soldiers were sent out, guns blazing, to take down these oversized, feathered pests. However, emus are fast, like ninja fast, dodging bullets and scattering like a tactical squad. After wasting a ridiculous amount of ammo and barely scratching the emu population, Australia had no choice but to wave the white flag. Imagine that, an entire country defeated by birds. Sometimes, history is just pure comedy. Number 10, the Dancing Plague of 1518. In July 1518, a strange phenomenon started in Strasbourg, Germany. A woman named Frau Trophäa began dancing uncontrollably in the streets, and no one could figure out why. It wasn't a party. It was more like a public meltdown with dance moves. Her solo act soon turned into a full-blown dance marathon, as dozens and then hundreds joined her. By the end of the week, around 400 people were flailing around, unable to stop, as if cursed by some invisible DJ. They danced until their feet bled, collapsing from exhaustion, strokes, or even death. Authorities tried everything: music, stages, prayers, but nothing worked. It was like the world's worst rave, and no one could leave. Doctors back then blamed it on everything from hot blood to demonic possession. Today, some believe it was a case of mass hysteria or even poisoning from a fungus that grows on rye. Whatever it was, the dancing plague was not a pretty cool thing. Number 9, Adolf Hitler, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1939, Erich Gottfried Christian Brandt, a member of the Swedish parliament, had the unusual idea to nominate Adolf Hitler for the Nobel Peace Prize. Just let that sink in. While it sounds like a sick joke, there was a method to this madness. Brandt's nomination was actually a sarcastic jab at the political climate of the time, aimed at highlighting the absurdity of world leaders cozying up to dictators. Unsurprisingly, this nomination didn't go over well. Within days, it was withdrawn, but the controversy stuck around like a bad smell. The whole fiasco was so messed up that the Nobel Committee decided to skip awarding a peace prize that year altogether, as if hitting pause on humanity's search for peace. And here's another mind-bending tidbit. Time magazine named Hitler Man of the Year in 1938. Not as an honor, but as a recognition of his impact, positive or negative, on global events. Sometimes reality is so absurd, it almost feels like fiction. Number 8, Pepsi had the world's 6th largest military. Russia loves Pepsi. In fact, Russia is Pepsi's 2nd largest market after the United States. Back in 1959, during the height of the Cold War, Richard Nixon made a trip to the Soviet Union to sell them on capitalism. In a wild twist of diplomacy, Nixon and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev got into a heated debate that could have sparked an international incident, until a Pepsi exec slid Khrushchev a cold one to cool him down. Khrushchev took a sip and was instantly hooked. But there was a hiccup. Russian rubles were practically monopoly money outside of Russia. So how do you pay for a Pepsi addiction when your currency is useless? Enter one of the strangest trade deals in history. In 1989, Russia offered Pepsi in exchange: submarines, military ships, and a stockpile of vodka for billions of dollars worth of Pepsi. For a short but hilarious moment, PepsiCo had a fleet that could rival small nations, making it the sixth most powerful military in the world. They eventually sold off the fleet for scrap, but for a brief, glorious moment, a soda company had more firepower than some actual countries. Number 7. The time Napoleon was attacked by rabbits. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's greatest military leaders, once faced an unexpected enemy: thousands of rabbits. In 1707, after signing the Treaty of Tilsit, Napoleon planned a celebratory rabbit hunt. His men gathered over 3,000 rabbits, expecting a grand event. But when the cages were opened, instead of fleeing, the rabbits charged straight at Napoleon and his men. Used to being fed, the rabbits mistook the emperor for their caretaker and swarmed him, climbing onto his legs and coat. Napoleon, completely overwhelmed, had no choice but to retreat, his army scattering in chaos. For a man who conquered much of Europe, running from an army of bunnies had to be one of his most humiliating defeats. Number 6. The surgeon who killed 3 people in one operation. Robert Liston was a legendary surgeon in the 1800s, famous for his speed. Back then, speed meant survival. Without modern anesthesia, patients were awake for surgery, so the faster the better. But in one infamous operation, Liston's quick hands led to a 300% mortality rate. During a routine leg amputation, Liston worked so fast that he accidentally sliced off 2 fingers from his assistant. Both the patient and the assistant later died of gangrene, likely because the saw wasn't properly cleaned. But the third death? That was pure chaos. Medical procedures were public events, with spectators standing dangerously close. At some point in the surgery, Liston swung his knife and accidentally cut through an elderly doctor's coat. Thinking he had been slashed open, the doctor went into shock, suffered a fatal heart attack, and died. In the end, 3 people lost their lives in an operation meant to save just 1. We mean, what the heck? Number 5. The 2 men who single-handedly prevented nuclear war. Twice, the world came within minutes of nuclear disaster. Both times, a single man stopped it. The first close call happened in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A Soviet submarine near Cuba lost contact with Moscow and, hearing American depth charges, assumed the war had begun. 3 officers had to vote on launching a nuclear torpedo. 2 voted yes. The third, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. His refusal prevented World War III. The second crisis came in 1983, when a Soviet satellite mistakenly detected 5 incoming American missiles. Stanislav Petrov, the officer on duty, knew protocol demanded an immediate counterattack, but something felt wrong. Why only 5 missiles? Ignoring orders, he declared it a false alarm. He was right. Petrov's quick thinking prevented a nuclear catastrophe, all caused by a glitch. Number 4. The Nevada town that faked the Wild West for tourists. By the late 1800s, Palisade, Nevada was a quiet, crime-free town, nothing like the gun-slinging chaos depicted in dime novels. But when railroad passengers arrived expecting Wild West action, the locals saw an opportunity. Every time a train passed through, staged shootouts broke out in the streets. Outlaws would rob the bank, only to be dramatically chased down by lawmen. Even the U.S. cavalry and local Native American tribes joined in, putting on Hollywood-style battles for the stunned travelers. The town was completely peaceful, but outsiders never caught on. Some say it was a tourism stunt, others believe the locals just wanted to prank city folk. Either way, Palisade briefly became the most thrilling town in Nevada. Number 3. The man who founded his own country on a raft. Lester Hemingway, the younger brother of author Ernest Hemingway, didn't just write stories, he lived them. In 1964, he decided to start his own country by sailing a bamboo raft into international waters near Jamaica and declaring it New Atlantis. To justify his claim, he referenced the Guano Islands Act of 1856, a bizarre law that allowed Americans to claim uninhabited islands with bird poop on them. Whether New Atlantis actually had guano remains unclear, but Hemingway went all in, writing a constitution, literally just the U.S. Constitution with United States swapped for New Atlantis, and attempting to turn the raft into an ocean research facility. Unfortunately, the dream was short-lived. In 1966, a tropical storm destroyed New Atlantis, leaving nothing behind. Number 2. The WW2 officer who fought with a sword and bagpipes. Lieutenant Mad Jack Churchill believed guns were overrated. Instead, he charged into battle with a broadsword, a longbow, and his bagpipes. During a raid in Norway, Churchill led his men off the landing craft, playing his bagpipes, and then hurling a grenade before charging with his sword. In 1944, after his unit was wiped out in Yugoslavia, he stood alone, playing one last tune before being knocked unconscious by a grenade. Captured and sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, he escaped, but was recaptured. In 1945, the camp's German guards overthrew the SS and freed him. After the war, Churchill retired, but not before appearing as an extra in the 1952 film Ivanhoe, proving he was just as theatrical off the battlefield. Number 1. The man who survived both atomic bombings in Japan. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is the only known person to survive both atomic bombings in Japan, making him either incredibly unlucky or incredibly resilient. On August 6, 1945, while on a work trip in Hiroshima, he was less than 2 miles from ground zero when the first atomic bomb detonated. The blast ruptured his eardrums, burned his upper body, and temporarily blinded him. Somehow, he survived and spent the night in a bomb shelter. The next day, he returned home to Nagasaki. While explaining the Hiroshima bombing to his boss on August 9th, another blinding flash filled the room. The second atomic bomb had just detonated. Despite severe burns and radiation exposure, Yamaguchi lived to be 93, proving that sometimes fate has an impossible way of balancing tragedy with survival. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more awesome content like this. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.